is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 520. My name is Marshall, one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line from snowy Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Hi, Luis.
What up? It is Denver being Denver. It was like t-shirt weather 2 days ago, and literally like 18 inches of snow since last night. Since like around midnight.
Oh man!
Yeah, like at this point, like my dog is consumed by the snow when she goes outside.
Like you can't see her if you put her out on the lawn.
Yeah.
Oh man!
It doesn't help that she's gray and white, but still.
Yeah.
So,
but you still have power. You still have internet, and we can still do the show. So that's
definitely. I went to Trader Joe's this morning. I got stuff to make grilled cheese and tomato soup, and stuff to cook dinner and some coffee. And so I was like, I don't want to leave the house again today.
Yeah. I want, I got to ask you, because you've been in Denver. For me, it feels like about 8 months, 6 months, something like that. It's actually been years and years and years.
It's been 7 years.
Unbelievable.
7.5, actually.
7.5 years.
Here's the parallel. I think of myself as the newest LR co-host.
Yeah.
I feel like I've done getting a decent amount of episodes in there, but I'm still kind of new to this, and it's just like, no, I've been doing LR for now 5 years.
Yeah, like double what anybody else. Yeah, exactly. So I have to ask you, you were born and raised in California.
Yes.
Have you got used to it? Is the fact that there's 18 inches of snow outside still something that you're just like whatever now, or are you like, what is this nonsense?
No, I'm fine. After literally the first year when I actually bought like gloves and like a proper winter coat and some boots, which I didn't really need before, I ended up being fine. I mean, look, you know me, like there's not a lot of stuff that really bothers me, and like I can just kind of adjust to whatever it is that I have to adjust to. So.
Okay.
It really hasn't made things too difficult for me.
Well, good for you. So we've got a bit of a mishmash here this week. We're going to be talking about some Throne of Eldraine single card discussion, and then we ran some numbers for you, basically on common scenarios that you'll find both in mulliganing and also while splashing your mana to help you make more informed decisions about those when you sit down to build your deck. So that's what we're going to be going over here. We've also got a few Throne of Eldraine blowouts to bring you too. So before we get into that, though, got to mention our sponsor. That's channelfireball.com. That's a place to go for really anything that you need magic related on the internet. And of course, there's lots to do at CFB. While you're there, you can sign up for the newsletter, channelfireball.com/newsletter. In fact, there's 3 different newsletters that you can sign up for. You can get the one that Luis does, which is what, current era stuff, standard and something like that.
Yeah, I kind of just write about whatever I feel like, which tends to be some combo of standard, modern, and lately pioneer with, the oddball topic thrown in for good measure. It's basically what I think that's sweet that's going on in Magic.
Okay, so you get a chance to into the twisted mind of Luis Scott-Vargas there. There's also the Commander one by the Raging Levine, Eric Levine, and there's a modern, and I'm assuming a pretty healthy dose of Pioneer in there as well by Matt Nass. So you can sign up for 1, 2, or all 3 of those newsletters at channelfireball.com/newsletter. And the show's also brought to you by you via the Patreon. That's patreon.com/limited resources. If you are a patron of the show, I put up a bonus video, some extra content for you. Luis and I, when we were in Richmond, we did a crack-a-pack off of Arena because I couldn't find like an actual pack. Well, I finished the draft and I played out the matches too. And I put the video up for our dear patrons. So if you're a patron, you can go and watch that at your leisure. It'll be up. It's a post right now that's on there. And if you're a patron, you are eligible for the Crack-a-Pack rares that we've got. And I've actually got 2 of them to do because if you remember, we got what do they call those, collector's boosters? Is that what they were?
Yeah, I think that's what they're called.
Yeah, the ones with all foils and special versions and stuff of Throne of Eldraine. Well, I've got one of them was one of those boosters, and then the other one was one of those boosters plus a couple of rares that we've gotten on the last few shows. So the first one is going to go to Caleb Hoover. So Caleb, thank you very much for your support. And that one is going to be in the mail today. And the other one is Brian Yin. Brian's from Long Island City, and Caleb's from Ohio. So thank you very much for both of you for supporting. And all you have to do is be a patron, and you are eligible for those as well. With that in mind, let's do a Crack-A-Pack here, and this will seed our new Crack-A-Pack giveaway. This will be the first one. All right, first card out is Tome Raider.
Well, it's a solid card.
It's a magic card. You can play it. Crystal Slipper. This one never really came together. You really came around on aggro, but do you actually run Crystal Slipper in your?
No, I think Crystal Slipper is quite bad. I do have to say that, the name of my opponent is now slipping, but I played against a player at the last Mythic Championship who I think very smartly boarded in Crystal Slipper. Because he was playing mono red aggro, and I had Realm Cloak Giant in my deck, plus Revenge of Ravens. I was black-white control, and he boarded Crystal Slipper not only to give haste against a Wrath, where you like slow roll a creature, I Wrath, and you're like creature haste, right? But also it scales well against Revenge of Ravens, where Revenge of Ravens punishes you for each creature you attack with, and punishes you for attacking with small creatures. Slipper means you can have like one creature only attacking, doing a little bit more work than it would otherwise. So
that makes sense.
So I thought that was showed a good understanding of Magic, and like those kind of like when to look at cards which are otherwise unplayable that I'm sure that they basically just got for free in the draft. But I do think that was pretty smart, and that's the kind of thing you do want to be thinking about to really maximize kind of your edge in Magic. But that said, you should never take Crystal Slipper and it's not a good card.
Start it. Yeah. And I'm assuming that this plan worked beautifully for your opponent against your Wrath Heavy bomb deck.
It didn't. They drew the Crystal Slipper and it was good. But it was
your
not.
Your deck was absurd. That deck was great.
Yeah.
I remember seeing that one.
So that was actually Dozy was the name of my opponent, because I just wanted to say that he played really well. So that's all.
Nice work. Next is Bartered Cow. That's the 4-mana 3/3, and when it dies, or when you discard it, you get a food token.
I really wanted to make this card work, but even in decks with lots of discard, it never got there. It is not good.
Yeah, I've never made a food token off of discarding Bartered Cow, unfortunately. Lost Legion. Oh yeah, this thing sees a lot of play. 1 black, 2/3. When it ETBs, you scry 2, and it's a knight, so all of those things end up mattering on some level.
Yeah, this is kind of like Tome Raider. I mean, it's a little worse than Tome Raider, but both are just like filler cards you'll play if you're those colors.
Yeah. Garenbrigg Squire, 1 and a green, 2/2. Whenever you cast a creature spell that has an adventure, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. No. Jousting Dummy. I have played against this card multiple times on Magic Online.
Oh, I actually think Jousting Dummy is fine as a way to get a monocolor deck to 23 or 24 cards.
Yeah, exactly. It's also a knight.
In a heavy Knights deck, it can also get a little bit more. So I think it's fine.
I like its horse too. It's made of wood. Its head is just a big block of wood. Outmuscle. Here's a removal spell. 3 and a green sorcery. Yeah, so that's kind of our front liner here. Blow your house down. No. Ooh. Well, we should have had this card first out, because then we wouldn't have had to talk about any of the other commons. It's Bacon to a Pie.
Oh yeah, I mean, this is obviously the best common, and also the most likely card, until we get to even probably the rares. Like it's hard to beat Bacon to a Pie most of the time.
Yeah, you and I were talking before the show about the biggest blowouts that you can get in Throne of Eldraine, and I was like, somebody targets my creature with Bacon to a Pie, and then they get a food token. It's like that good. Spectre's Shriek. This is one of the color hate cards. It's black for a sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand. You may choose a non-land card from it. If you do, that player exiles that card. If a non-black card is exiled this way, exile a card from your hand as well. Strictly sideboard. I've never started this card or seen anybody start it. But certainly not going to knock Bacon to a Pie off.
Well, it's funnily enough, in that same draft, my opponent sided in that card against me. It was very good.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And you were playing black-white, right?
Yeah, I was playing black-white, but it was just good against me. Especially because of that, but even if they didn't have a black card, it was fine.
Okay, fair enough. Sir Farron the Henchhammer. This is the GG for a 2/2 legendary human knight. And whenever he attacks, another target attacking creature gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is Sir Farron's power. This card has disappointed me a bit. I don't think it's a bad Magic card, but it does have a weird combination of needing GG really on turn 2 is where you want to play this thing. So if you're outside of monocolored, then you may not be able to do that. And then it does require some work. We talk about setup cost on the show about, well, what do I have to do to make this card really good? And this one, not insane. You don't have to do a whole lot, but it does require you to pump it up to make it really good.
Basically, I like Sir Farron in mono green, and I like it when you have some pump spells. Or, I mean, you always play it in mono green, whether you have pump spells or not. But I don't like it more than the kind of just intrinsically powerful common removal spells. Like once you know you're mono green, great, you can take this card pretty high. But it's so much more committal than Bake into a Pie or Scorching Dragonfire or even Outmuscle, honestly. Because
exactly.
Sir Farron drops off really quickly, but when you play it on turn 2, it can really beat your opponent down.
It really can. And, there are a lot of extra combat tricks in this set thanks to the adventure cards having so many. Another of the legendary knights here, this is Sir Aelin the Lion's Claw. This is the white one, so 3 white for a 4/4 first striker. And whenever Sir Aelin attacks, other creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Powerful. I mean, that's a lot to like there.
I'm okay on this card. It's a 5-drop, and the white decks really don't want tons of those. So I rarely would take this card early. Like I would, I think early in the draft I would just take. I basically always take a Tactician over it, and I would take Fairy Guidemiller over this most of the time early.
Oh, okay, wow, yeah, I can see the argument with the Tactician, but I would take this over the Guidemother. I think. Yeah, just like the upside on it, and the fact that it's so solid, right? Like 4/4 first striker is actually kind of a pain to deal with just on the board. Our rare, actually, I'll tell you, we've got a foil common. It's Syrian Barrage. It's actually a pretty good one.
Yeah, I like Syrian Barrage. I mean, it's not as good as Bake into a Pie, clearly, but it's a fine card.
Right, and just to be clear, none of these cards are as good as Bake into a Pie yet, right? So we're still we're needing a great.
We have not surpassed that.
And we didn't hear. It's Escape to the Wilds. So this is the 3 green-red sorcery. Exile the top 5 cards of your library. You may play cards exiled this way until the end of your next turn, and you can play an additional land. That's a very good card.
It is.
But boy, green-red has been real stinky for me. Like a green-red rare is really not like it gets bumped down a significant amount and definitely below Bake into a Pie for me.
Yeah, I would take Syrian Barrage, Bake into a Pie, definitely over this. I would take it over like Sir Farron, but red-green is not one of the better color combinations. It's a fine one. I think it's better than most people. I mean, I think some people think that it's unplayable. I don't believe that. But a slow gold rare in an aggressive color combination really just isn't where I want to start. I think you can do a lot better.
Yeah, same.
And that's part of the reason that Bake into Pie is so good, right? Like Bake into a Pie goes into any black deck and is great in all of them. And black also goes into like blue-black is good, black-white is good, black-green is good, like black-red is fine. So it doesn't send you any direction really. And that's really like in stark contrast to Escape into the Wilds, which is like, well, you're this one specific deck that's not very good.
Right. Do you think that from a design perspective that Bake into a Pie is too strong for that slot? Because I take it over so much stuff. Yeah, right?
So it's probably a little bit much just because draft is less interesting if you're always taking having a common at that power level that you're basically always taking over most of the contents of the pack. Like I would say that you're probably like if you knew Bake into a Pie was in a pack and had no other info, what are you going to take it like around half the time, something like that?
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of good rares and uncommons in this set, but
yeah, I guess there is, and you get 4 shots at those and only 1 bake, but still, yeah, it's up there.
You're taking it such a high percentage of the time that at common, I think it's probably like a little bit much, but I don't think it's an egregious error, and it's okay to go over the line if part of what you're trying to do is make strong commons. Though, once again, white kind of got the bottom of the barrel there, but that has nothing to do with Bake into a Pie.
Right. Yeah. Because remember, they did have a philosophy shift again fairly recently within the last year or so, right? Where before they would have these Doomblade style effects, then they went to much, much slower where like you weren't getting an effect that looked like this for less than 5 mana. And oftentimes it wasn't in an instant. So, but sometimes it was. And now, we've seen this shift back where they're like, no, it's okay. We want to balance things out and push some power at common. And Bake into a Pie, at least on the surface, looks like a totally reasonable one. But the amount of cards that I take it over is a little alarming. Like I'm a little bit like,
Yeah, I mean, that that does cut into the replayability of draft, as does a lot of the things they seem to be doing. Though, just side topic, arena draft bots have gotten a lot better. The latest bot update cut down mill so dramatically to the point where like it feels like a real draft again. And yes, I'm sure that in like a week or something or 2 weeks, we're gonna be feeling it again because that's the limitation of the system. But right now, it's kind of refreshed arena draft, and I think that you would enjoy it if you tried.
Okay, I'll do that. Yeah, the only one I've done not on Magic Online has been that one that I mentioned for the Patreon video. So yeah. I'll have to jump back in. Okay, let's get into some Throne of Eldraine single card discussion. We'll do overrated, underrated, or properly rated because now the set's, it's been out forever. And so we really do get a chance to kind of check in on, for lack of a better term, the metagame on what's going on with it right now. And one way that we like to do that is by doing overrated, underrated, or properly rated for where cards are right now today after that Mythic Championship, the paper one in Richmond, where that was the last big limited event for this set, like at the top levels or whatever. So let's jump in. Ardenvale Tactician, you and I have both been, I would say, in love with this card for the long haul. Is it currently overrated, which is, I think, the most likely, properly rated, which I think is the second most likely, and underrated, which I think is the least likely because, well, everybody thinks the card's good now.
I think it's now properly rated, but it started out underrated.
Agreed.
I think a lot of people, including us, immediately thought, "Oh, Trapped in the Tower is probably the best white common," and it has very quickly become clear that Ardenvale Tactician is not only the best white common, but the best by a lot. It's just such a powerful card, and it works so perfectly into what white wants to do. So. I think Tactician is now properly rated, even verging on overrated, but I think I do want to draw the distinction that like this is a good one to check in on because it uses a new mechanic. Traditionally, the best white common is the removal spell slot, and it just so happens that this mechanic is really good, this card is really good, and Trapped in the Tower is actually really bad compared to where that slot normally lands.
I'm curious. So we have been talking about how to fix white. Right. That came up in the show when I had the coverage folks on. You and I have talked about it after. We've even talked about it in the context of Ardenvale Tactician filling a good role in that way. Right. A good, aggressive, cheaply costed creature that has relevant text on it if you top deck it late in the game. If they pushed this type of card even further for white, would that be too much or would it fix it? And what I'm talking about are cards like this that if you play them on the turn that they're intended, like turn 3 for this, it's good, right? You're like, this is fine. I'm happy with this. Think, 2-powered flyer, for 2 mana with like 1 toughness or a drawback, something like that. But if they tacked on things that made it better in the late game so that it wasn't a dead draw, because I've come to the conclusion after these discussions that that's really the issue with white, is that if they try to push it as an aggressive color and you put a bunch of those cards in your deck and you don't win the game in the first 6-7 turns, when you draw your 2-powered 2-drop or your 3/2 for 3 with an ability late in the game, it falls really flat, right? And the cards that excel out of white are the ones that actually are decent later in the game and also very good early in the game. Another one that comes to mind is the dinosaur, the 2/3. When you attack with it, you tap down an opposing creature. It was only 3 mana. Right? What was it called? Henge? Or,
I remember. Territorial Hammerhead.
Yeah, Hammer guy.
Territorial Hammer Skull.
Hammer Skull, right? Like that was another card that stood out like Ardenvale Tactician does, where you're like, okay, that's what I want, right? That's the type of card where if it is turn 8 and my opponent stabilized a bit, I draw that card and it's like, uh-oh, right? Like I play this and my opponent starts to go, oh, okay. And if you draw Ardenvale Tactician on turn 8 and you're like, before combat, and they're like, oh no, right? And like they're losing 2 blockers. You're adding an additional flyer to the board. How far can they actually push these type of cards? Because each time they do, the card really stands out, like Ardenvale Tactician in this set.
I think that there is room to go a little deeper here because, like, look, Black got bacon to a pie. Red gets Scorching Dragonfire. Green even got Out Muscle, which I think is and Fierce Witchstalker is actually the best green common. Like, White can go pretty deep. And one of the cool things about the cards you're describing, the tap that had to use tap as a mechanic, is they tend to be much, much better in aggro, which does limit their power because, look, Territorial Hammerskull was awesome, But if you took Hammerskull and ended up blue-white control, or you ended up a more controlling black-white deck rather than the aggressive version, the Hammerskull is not at its best. You'd still play it. It's just a really powerful card. But you do limit the power, whereas something like Bake into a Pie, one of the features of it or characteristics of it that you and I were even talking about earlier was it's such a safe bet. It's just good in every deck. Mm-hmm. There's no deck where you're like, oh yeah, I guess I'll play this Bake into a Pie. It's always like, no, Bake into a Pie is insane. So that is something that you can really do, where these white commons rely on aggressive mechanics rather than just in cards that are always good. And that I think really does give you a pretty good way to make it so you can design these powerful, appealing cards that aren't always a sure bet. Because I think draft is more fun when you have to work to maximize your cards, when everything isn't a sure bet, when things don't always work out exactly the way you want,
Right. Okay. Yeah. Interesting to see if they continue to push in that direction. Next is Fairy Guidemother. Overrated, underrated, properly rated. Is Fairy Guidemother the card that changed the most in our rankings from like set review to now? It's got to be on the short list.
Well, so, I mean, this is one of the things that's difficult about initial set rankings, right? So whether it's like our initial set review, whether it's the one we do on the podcast, the written one, even just people's card evaluations in the first week or whatever, it's that when things are new, it's especially when they're doing something different than previous cards. Like Fairy Guidemother combines an adventure mechanic plus a 1-mana 1/1 flyer, and it so happens that I think Fairy Guidemother is very good. I think currently it's still a little underrated based on just when I see people take it and what they do with it. But I think that our initial take on it was like, wow, we did not give this the respect it deserved. And
no, it looked like a bunch of mediocre things tacked together. And my initial take was, okay, I like that there's a lot of things, but none of them are that good. So I'm probably not going to love this card, right? Like sorcery speed pump spells that are designed really just to push through a bunch of damage. I tend to rank those lower than instant speed ones that could either push through damage or be used in conjunction with blocks. 1/1 flyers for one, generally speaking, not really where you want to be. But for whatever reason in the set, the package comes together nicely. And, I got to say, it reminds me of Ardenvale Tactician, right? It's your one drop that if you draw on turn 8, you're like, oh, sweet. Right? Actually, like I'm getting in for 8 here and killing you.
I actually think you'd rather have Fairy Guidemother be the 12th card or 13th card in your deck than in your opening hand. Because if it's in your opening hand, you almost always play it on turn 1 because it's going to get in 4 or 5 damage and that's probably worth it. But top decking late when you have like a 4-power creature in play is worth a lot. So I think Fairy Guidemother is great. Again, I would love to see White get more of these kind of designs. Also, I just think Adventure is a fantastic mechanic. Like, there's a lot of very fair criticisms you can level at Throne of Eldraine, but I think the Adventure mechanic is just one of the best things that they've got going on, and my favorite new mechanic. So
it has worked out really well.
And Fairy Guidemother is very similar to the next card on the list, Outflank, which I think both came in pretty low, and I currently have them both as still a little underrated. I think Outflank is good.
Okay. Is Trapped in a Tower overrated now?
Oh, yeah. Trapped in the Tower is most certainly overrated. Look, I'm not saying cut this card from your deck. I play it in all my white decks. But first of all, sideboard it out. If you see Fairy Guidemothers on the other side, you just can't have this card in your deck. It's such a liability. And then second, Trapped in the Tower is not as high a pick as you think and not a reason to be in white. Like, I have taken Fairy Guidemother over this card. I can't in good conscience recommend you do that really early in the game, but I don't think that Trapped in the Tower is where you want to be. Like, it's just not a great card.
Yeah, oftentimes when I play it, I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm going to lock down a creature for now because it's really hard to jump a creature like an instant speed or whatever. But I do not look at it as a removal spell that is necessarily going to stick on a creature permanently. I just don't, right? Like, there's other ways too. It's not just Fairy Guidemother. There's Run Away Together and stuff like that, where there are ways for the opponent to lose, to get trapped in a tower off of that creature fairly frequently on cards that see a lot of play. So, if you view it in that lens, it goes down a notch, right? If you're like, well, I can make it so an opposing creature can't block for the turn and likely can't block going forward or can't do anything going forward. But the time when they get to knock off Trapped in the Tower, it's just a blowout. It's really, really not the same thing as a card like, Bake Into a Pie or whatever.
Yeah. And look, there's some matchups where it's fantastic. The last, one of the first draft at the Pro Tour when I played red green, I played against an opponent with 2 trapped in the towers, and I had no way to take advantage of that, no way to remove them, and they were just great. They 2 mana kill my 5/5. So I'm not saying this card is bad, but it's worse than it looks, and both in terms of its own effect and relative to other cards in the format.
The next card is much better than it looked on the surface. Yeah. It's Merfolk Secret Keeper, properly rated now.
So it lives in this weird world. I believe it's underrated, or it was underrated initially, but I believe it's overrated because of Arena, though it is still very good. I mean, I guess that's a nod to the Arena metagame being a little different, or at least it was a little different, and also just the perception based on the Arena metagame, where I think Merfolk Secret Keeper is a good card. I tend to pick it. I like to pick it around pick 4 to 6, right? I'm happy if I see them there. If I wield them, I feel like blue's really open. And the blue decks where I get 3+ of them, especially as Runaway Together, end up being, I'm very happy with those. That said, it's not a card I'm going to first pick or second pick. Like, it's just not that good, even though the Arena metagame makes it look like this is the best card, or, the best thing going on in Throne of Eldraine. I get that's because the bots undervalued it, but that still plays into people's perception of the card. So, yeah. On balance, I believe this card is probably overrated, but I do think it is overperformed compared to what it initially looked like. Yeah. I think the biggest difference is that cards like this, like the Tome Scour type cards, 1 mana mill 5, were crap unless you got like 6 of them. But Merfolk Secret Keeper, first of all, does a little more because it gives you an 0/4, which is really important. And second, you can actually legit mill them out with just 2 of this card in your deck if you have a couple bounce spells.
Yeah, you really can, and it absolutely happens. And the thing that helps along those lines is also the next card, which is Didn't Say Please.
Yeah, another card which I think started out underrated. I think is probably properly rated now. But despite me liking aggro in this format, I also like Didn't Say Please, and I think it's a good staple for blue decks.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that it's properly rated as a good card you should put into your deck, right? Not on the level of some of the removal spells that we've talked about before, but like, I don't cut Didn't Say Please from my blue decks.
No.
And there's been many formats where I would cut a card like this. I mean, you could make a strong argument that Didn't Say Please, if you wanted to cancel, is worse because milling your opponent could be a liability. As it turns out in the format, it, especially with Merfolk Secret Keepers, it ends up adding up and being a good thing. But there are things that that come back from the graveyard, right? There's the cat, there's the 4/2. Like, things can go wrong by tacking on an extra mill if your game plan isn't mill. It just turns out that your game plan absolutely can be mill. And yeah, I think Didn't Say Please is properly rated and is kind of good. What about Forever Young, the natural enemy of both Merfolk Secret Keeper and Didn't Say Please?
Well, I think that plays into Forever Young being better than it initially looked. Because it's card neutral, right? It's 2 mana. You put as many creatures as you want on top of your deck, but you also draw a card. So like, you end up with the same number of cards. But there's 2 things I think that make it overperform compared to similar cards like this. Like, what it looks like a late game Raise Dead type effect. But first of all, the fact that you can cycle it on turn 2 is really big. Like, that's actually really powerful, because it means you can keep a hand like a 2-lander with this card, or maybe a 4-lander with this, a 3-drop and a 4-drop, where you're just like, my Raise Dead, I'll just cycle it on turn 2 because this isn't going to be useful for a while. It's not costing me my early sequence of plays, really. It's not being stuck in my hand.
Right, and the reason you bring that up is because traditionally Raise Dead effects will target a card in a graveyard and you get that back to your hand, and if you don't have a target, you can't even cast it.
Yeah, and
here you could draw a land with it. I mean,
because also traditionally they don't say draw a card on them either. So like, compare this to something like Soul Salvage, right, which we just saw, 3 mana, get back 2 creatures. That was also a pretty good card, but you do not want to see that in your opening hand. You're always just like, oh god, this is just going to be my hand for 7 turns. Forever Young does fine no matter when. And then the second thing is mill is a real thing in the format, and not even against not like straight mill super focused decks, just the random blue control deck that Didn't Say Please is one of your cards, and you're just like, okay, Forever Young back 3 good creatures. So
yeah. I had one more thing to add to why it's particularly good in the set, which is just adventures, right? Like, if you adventure something, cast a creature, it dies, you get it back, you get to adventure and then cast it again. Like, that's just a lot of value.
Yeah, that adds to this card, I think, being, again, starting underrated, and I think even now is probably a little bit underrated.
Agreed. I think it's slightly underrated now because at least for the sideboard against the mill deck, it's good. And then, like you said, you can actually just use it for value as well. What about the Kitty Cat Cauldron Familiar?
So this is the 1-mana 1/1 that drains them for 1 on ETB, and then you can sack a food to bring it back from your graveyard. I mean, I'm sure if anyone who's played a game of Standard or watched a game of Standard in the last 2 weeks realizes how good this card is in Standard right now, because especially with Oko gone, the cat plus Witch's Oven deck is kind of the deck to beat. But I also want to say that combo in draft is very, very good. Like if I had a Cauldron Familiar and a Witch's Oven, I'd almost always just play both, because that combo gives you a persistent blocker that drains them for 1 and gives you any sort of outlet for sacrifice. Like if you have anything that cares about eating creatures, it's very good. And then even in a deck without Witch's Oven, if it makes a lot of food, I've found that the Cauldron Familiar can be decent, especially if you got some like self-mill going on or any discard effects. Like it really does perform.
Yeah, I think the card's fine. I in fact, the video that I mentioned before, guess what? We ended up with one. So you can see how it performs in a real deck if you're on the Patreon for that. It's fine. The cat, I love the combo. I don't love it. I think it's slightly overrated without the combo, because the cat's okay, but it is relatively low impact. And if you don't have repeat food sources, it does kind of run out of steam pretty quickly. So I just want to see some way to make food, to have a hunter or just something that I know I can spit out multiple food, because otherwise you usually build the deck in a way that has other ways to spend the food as well. And spending it on the cat is actually a pretty low impact thing to do, especially if you have like a Trail of Crumbs or any other,
I think it's again, using outside influences, I think the card was probably a bit underrated, because I think it's like a legit very powerful card. But thanks to Standard and it going nuts on Standard, I bet it's overrated now, because now people identify this as a good card in their brain, and then they look at this and they're like, oh yeah, the Cauldron Familiar is great card. So it's probably overrated right now.
Yeah. What about Reaper of Night?
So this is the adventure, Harvest Fear, 4 mana, they discard 2, and 7 mana, 4/5. I think this card is still a little bit underrated. I had a real roller coaster where we initially thought this card wasn't great. And then I'm like week 2, we're like, wow, this card's fantastic. I've gone down a little from there because I've gone back to my roots and have been attacking people for 2.
You started beating people down. Yeah.
And when they play a Reaper of Night, like I just don't care. But I still think the card's probably underrated because it is a powerful effect and a pretty strong card.
Yeah, I'm with you. I still think it's slightly underrated, but only a little bit.
It's also matchup dependent, and that's one of the things I do like about Throne of Eldraine, is that there are a lot of distinct feeling matchups where I've had decks that, I drafted 2 of these, they're both in my sideboard, but then I play against the control deck with my like black-red deck, and I'm like, wow, I'm bringing these 2 Reapers, and they're going to be fantastic. Or you start Reaper, and then you just side it out because you're like, wow, I'm playing against like a low-curve mono-green aggro deck. I just don't really want this card in my deck.
Yeah. What about the Cauldron of Eternity? This is the black legendary artifact from that cycle.
No surprise now. So we're late enough in the format. This card's just garbage.
It's so bad. It's not the worst of the cycle, because that goes to the blue one, the Magical Mirror or whatever. But this one is not good. I got it once and I was really excited. And I'm like, what? Like, it has all these weird clauses. It feels like you're being taxed. It's just like, but I just want to do the thing, like it has this thing that says whenever a creature you control dies, put it on the bottom of its owner's library. So you can't feed the cauldron once it's in play. And it's like, there must have bbeen some combo or something that made it too good. But otherwise, it's weird because the other ones just give you so much, right? Like, you read The Great Henge and you're like, oh, wow. Oh, geez. Like, it's all good news. And here it's not. It's like you have to pay 2 life when you activate it. You can only do it at sorcery speed. It's like there's all these clauses. It's like you have to sign a bunch of papers just to activate the dang thing once.
Yeah, I think it's quite bad. And if anyone has gotten to this point in the format without realizing that, I'd be surprised. But yeah, it's not good.
Yeah. Oh God, this is one of the cards I fear most in the entire format. It's Barge In.
Yeah, this card I think the biggest overall category of cards that changed in rating was basically the combat tricks are great. And they started out like most formats, combat tricks range from poor to okay. Like, there's not very many formats where combat tricks are legitimately great. But in Throne, I think because of the combination of a bunch of them being on adventure cards, which are, kind of make up for card disadvantage, and the combination of aggressive decks being supported and there being good reasons to be in them, combat tricks ended up being pretty good. And I think Bargain is one of those tricks. It's kind of emblematic of that.
Yeah, and it is the type of card that for 1 mana can change the outcome of a game, and that it doesn't happen that often, even if it is quite situational. What about Raging Redcap?
Well, this is part of the reason something like Bargain is so good, is that
yes.
I've just had a lot of games involving like Raging Redcap or Rimrock Knight, these like high-powered creatures that happen to be non-human, where you just end up dealing a ton of extra damage based on that extra trample. Plus Raging Redcap works really well with +2/+2, right? Just Bargain plus Raging Redcap is 2 mediocre commons that combine to hit them for 6 points of double striking trample damage, right? 3/3.
And often blank their blocks if it happens to be on the red cap.
And what you'll do a lot of the times is you'll spend only 1 mana on this card, and it's going to trade for a 2 or 3 mana card plus a couple extra damage, because why not? So I have been fairly impressed with both Bargain and the red cap. There's just a lot of ways to pump red cap. One of my other favorite combos is Raging Red Cap plus an adventure creature, which is Rimrock Knight or Fairy Godmother. Fantastic combos with both. So
you have huge amounts of damage.
Really a lot of payoff. So I would say Raging Red Cap is underrated.
What about this next one? Maybe your favorite card in the set, Rimrock Knight.
My favorite card in the set is Gingerbrute. Thank you very much, which is on this list, by the way. I think the story Gingerbrute tells is so perfect. Also, I happen to watch the Gingerbread Man probably on average about once a day. So, since I do have a 3.5-year-old, so but the Gingerbread really does tell that story. Anyways, Rimrock Knight is, I think, a very well-designed card. It plays really well. It also always feels good when you're like, Youthful Knight into Rimrock Knight, kill their blocker on turn 3, then play the Rimrock Knight. You're up a card and you have a 2/1 and a 3/1 in play. Like, that's just awesome. It's also just a fine thing to just run out on turn 2 if you've got no other plays. It's good with Edgewall Innkeeper. It's just good all around, and a nice, solid, aggressive card. So I think Rimrock Knight is still a little bit underrated. I find this card to be one of the better red commons for sure.
I think so too, and that's really key, right? Is just understanding where these things fall, because underrated means also underdrafted.
Yes,
right. It means that you might be able to get these for a little bit less than their going rate. 7 Dwarves. Did this just miss? So
here's the thing. I think if you don't worry too much about the text box, the card's actually okay, because you can usually pick up 2 or 3, and every now and then they combine. I think the card is underrated. And I think part of that is a function of the mono red decks really wanting 2-drops. It just the decks function a lot better once you have 2-drops, and this is one of those just solid 2-drops that I end up wanting in my deck. Basically, I play this card and pick it at a higher rate than I thought I would.
Okay, yeah. Have you ever had all 7? No, right?
No, the most I've had is 4, but even then, I mean, even with like 3, it's a fine card. And I think a lesson here with this card is don't worry. Like, the card stands on its own merits as a passable 2-drop. Don't think that, if I don't get 5 of these, it's unplayable. Like, it's actually fine with just a couple of them.
What about Thrill of Possibility? We saw this as the way to trigger your draws an extra card even on your opponent's turn.
Yeah, I think Thrill of Possibility is worse than it looks, because just basically that blue-red draw 2 deck is not very good. And that leads to Thrill of Possibility, I think, being a little overrated.
Yeah, I believe it's also overrated. Edgewall Innkeeper, did it fall into the constructed trap of now being overrated somehow?
I do think this card's overrated. And I remember looking at text coverage, and at one of the GPs, the coverage reporter was like, "What are your top uncommons, right? Or your top?" And all these people answered Edgewall Innkeeper as like one of the top uncommons. And my experience with this card have been kind of mixed, to where, yes, I think the card is good in the right deck, but I'm kind of off of just like first picking this card and going for it.
It does actually have a fairly high setup cost, right? Like I really am unhappy with a 1/1-for-1 in limited. And when I do draw my first card off of it, then it sort of replaces the place that the Edgewall Keeper itself held. So I'm really not happy until I get the next card off of it. And it can be difficult to combine all of these things together, right? Like it does matter. Now it does have a very high ceiling, especially if you're able to get, 8, 7, whatever, adventure cards, especially the ones that are easier to cast. So I still think it's powerful, but I feel like it's a little overrated as well.
Yeah.
Sorry, buddy. Garen Brigg Paladin.
Ooh, I like this card. This is a 5-mana 5/5 that's hard to block. I actually think this card really delivers, and it looked like the classic overcrosted green dork that, you would play if you were desperate. But I think Garen Brigg Paladin is a card I actively want like 2 of in my mono green decks.
I think so too. Also, we noted it, but it was hard to kind of figure out, well, how often will I have adamant for it? And it's like by turn 5, right? If you're only 2 colors, well, you're very likely to have adamant for it, or by 5th mana.
Right. And that's another thing that really goes into it is that the adamant's a lot easier to achieve naturally than a card like, Clockwork Servant, right? The 3-mana 2/3 that draws a card. Like that card falls off a little later in the game. You would like to have that card early. Whereas, what's that?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Whereas the Garen Brigg Paladin is when you naturally would cast it, even in a 2-color deck, it often gets the counter.
Right. Next card is Rosethorn Halberd.
I think this card's underrated.
You love this card.
Look, Rancor is a great card. So
Oh, man. 2 statements that are true and don't have really a whole lot to do with each other.
I found Rosethorn Halberd to be an important part of the green aggro decks, and picking up a couple of these is a way to kind of cheese your opponent out and get some nice wins. Okay.
And I know you love putting them on Ginger Brute, but we'll talk about that in a minute. What about Covetous Urge, the blue-black hybrid uncommon?
Somehow this card's still underrated. I just routinely see this card 5th plus pick in pack 1.
I know.
Or later. And the card is the best reason to be in blue-black control. It is so good. It's not only a 2-for-1, but it's a 2-for-1 where you get to snipe their best card out of their hand, and later in the game, you can still just get a card out of their graveyard.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that card. It is slow, right? Like I get it, why it's not like considered a huge bomb, but it's the type of card that you can build your game plan towards. If you have it in your hand, you can, adjust your plays so that you have the time to resolve both the Covetous Urge and then the card that you get off of it. And that's just a huge swing. In the game of tug of war that a limited game can be, that is just right over in my direction. It's big. All right, let it go. Ginger Brute.
Well,
underrated, overrated, properly rated. Definitely started out underrated.
It started out underrated. I think now it's closer to properly rated than anything else because people have just come around to it being a solid aggro card. Mm-hmm. My fondness for the card includes just how good I think the design is, which I think it is very strong. But basically, I find this card to be an acceptable card in any aggro deck, and especially good in decks that can pump them nicely. So I just want to call it Ginger Brute as not only being a good design, but playing really well. It fits very nicely in a lot of these decks, and I think ends up being kind of where you want to be when you're playing just these various aggressive decks.
One of your signature moves for this set is Ginger Brute with the Rosethorn Halberd.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a good combo. Turn 1,
it really is.
1, like Woodland Tracker or Wildwood Tracker. Turn 2, Ginger Brute, Rosethorn Halberd. You're attacking them for 5 points of damage on turn 2, and you have a 3-power unblockable creature.
Yeah, it's really legit. For me with Ginger Brute, it came to my mind that as long as I have a way to increase its power from 1 to anything above 1, I'm in. As just a 1/1 that I have to pay 1 mana to give it unblockable, and I can maybe sack for food occasionally if needed, it's borderline, but on the wrong side of the borderline a little bit. But if I have really any way in my deck to put a +1/+1 counter on it, to equip it with anything, to enchant it with anything, I'm in. The card actually gets quite a bit of work done. And then I don't know, how often do you actually sacrifice it for food? That almost never happens.
Not too often. It's mostly if you get into a situation where you're racing and you're like chump sack, or you have like a a food, some sort of food theme in your deck. But for the most part, if you're doing that, you're losing. So that's not huge.
And it is like the sweetest design. Right?
Oh yeah, it really is. It was actually funny. I people were talking about Eldraine cards, and I said Gingerbread's my favorite design in the set, and Mark Rosar responded and said, "Yeah, it's mine too," which I found to be pretty funny.
It is a really great design. I mean, it's so well designed, in fact, that's part of the reason why I wrote it off when I first saw it. I thought it was a joke. Right. I thought it was okay, I see what you did there, but it's not a card that I actually want to play. It turns out I was wrong. Enchanted Carriage.
I believe this card's overrated. It looked very good initially, but I have not been that impressed. It just doesn't do quite enough, and doesn't, like, even though it puts 2 mice on the board plus a 4/4, it's not like 5 mana 4/4 plus 2 1/1s. It's kind of like some hybrid in between where it's like a 4/4 or 2 1/1s, and then sometimes they kill the 1/1s and the 4/4 doesn't do that much, and sometimes they kill the 4/4 and you got these 1/1s that don't do that much. Like, it's I don't know. And it's an artifact, which, people are main decking some artifact removal. You get shield breakered every now and then. I have just not thought, like, I used to think, I open a pack, I see this card, I'm like, ooh, this is a nice early pick. Now I'm like, is there anything else? I don't really love this card.
You're shopping around. Yeah. So slightly overrated for
I think so.
Enchanted Carriage. All right, let's talk about a couple of the possible blowouts in the set, and then we'll go over some numbers and we'll call it a show here. What are some of the Throne of Eldraine blowouts that you'll see, matching?
Yeah, so these are plays that are, first of all, devastating, and also good to keep in mind. Some of them are a little more niche than others. The most niche one probably is one we've actually mentioned on the show, which is using Crashing Drawbridge to block Gingerbrute, which is they go like, attack my Gingerbrute, you have to have a haste creature to block it, they activate it. You're like, okay, activate my Drawbridge, blocks my 2/2.
Oh yeah, that's called the Paul Cheon right there. Yeah.
Did he get blown out by that?
Oh yeah. He was like, oh no.
That's awesome.
It's really funny. Yeah. I mean, I think everybody, like, if you ever face that sequence of cards, it's almost impossible to see until they do it. And then you're like, right. Never again.
But I wouldn't say that, like, something that tricked Paul is worthy of, like, a huge complicated blowout. Like, that's if we were to make a list of those interactions that have fooled Paul, just, we wouldn't have time to talk about a whole lot else in the show.
What about our next poor Paul? I did not mean to drag him in, but I guess I did. What about our next Throne of Eldraine blowout?
Removing the target of an adventure spell in response, which is to say they're like, I'll use 2 Unveiled Treefolk, cast Oaken Boon, and put 2++1 counters on my creature, and you're like, okay, I'm going to kill it in response. Then they lose the creature, and then they don't get to cast 2 Unveiled Treefolk because it's gone.
God, yeah. Or if it gets countered, right? If they didn't say please, it feels so good.
Because these adventure cards kind of play like a flashback spell, where you're like, play the spell, flashback the creature. But one key difference is that if the target's removed, or if they get countered, they don't hang out in your graveyard ready to be played. They are gone. Like, you don't get the opportunity to do that. And that was a kind of a rude awakening to a lot of people, and still is. And it's part of the reason I don't love the Treefolk that much. You just have to be very conservative about when you use your adventure spells and what you're targeting with them.
Yeah, 4 mana sorcery speed's risky biz, no doubt about it, especially with the instant speed removal actually being upped a bit in the set. We mentioned this one earlier, but Fairy Guidemother targeting the creature that they trapped in the tower. Which is
not only a huge flavor win where you're sitting there trapped in this tower by an evil witch, and then the Fairy Guidemother comes to fly you out of it. But also it's just an insane blowout where they're like, trapped in the tower, you're 3/3, and then some amount of time later, you're like, okay, play this, attack you for 5, knock off your removal spell, and then play the 1/1, because why not?
Yeah, totally. And it also has, like you said, it has that haste feel, right? Where you're getting it now, right? You're freeing up the creature now, but it was already on the battlefield, so you get to swing with it right away.
Yeah, I think that whenever this happens, it feels like you lose the game on the spot.
Yeah, for sure. What about what has become a signature combo, especially if you play a lot of Arena, which is Run Away together with Merfolk Secret Keeper?
And this combo not only is very mana efficient, it also really blunts your opponent's ability to kill you. Because imagine they finally built up a good force and they're like, attack you with 2 5/5s. You're like, okay, block 1, bounce my Secret Keeper plus your other one. I take no damage this combat. You spend your whole turn replaying this 5/5. I mill you again with the Secret Keeper, and then I can even chump. Mm-hmm. So over the course of 2 attacks, instead of taking 20 damage, you took 5 damage.
Yep, and you're got yourself very close to milling them out fully. It really is a huge setback, even if you have a pretty good draw going.
Definitely.
And then this one feels the worst if you're on the opposite end of that. So, or if you're on the same end of that, which is you're milling them out, you're secret keeper him, you're running away together, and you got them down to 6 cards, and you're in a pretty stable board state. Things are looking good. And then they go forever young. And you're like, no, put 13 creatures on top of my library or whatever. So now they're just drawing straight gasoline for the rest of the game. And they just set you back by 3 or 4 more folk secret keeper activations or whatever.
Yeah.
So
Forever Young is a clutch card in those matchups.
It really is. It is exactly the card that you don't want to see, and it's exactly the card that if you still have Didn't Say Please in your hand, that's the one you're waiting for. When you see that one come out, go ahead and counter that one, and then you'll win the game pretty easy. Okay, one last thing that we wanted to cover before we wrap up here. I went over some numbers using the hypergeometric calculator, which I'll put a link to in the show notes. This is a way that you can, I don't know what people use it for in real life, but it's really useful for card games like Magic and poker and stuff like that. And one of the things that I had when I came over to Magic from playing poker was in poker, I remember wondering when I first started playing, like, are people just running all these crazy numbers at the table? Because you'd hear people say like, oh, well, I'm 25% from here. And you're like, well, how did you figure that out? Like, that's absurd, right? And what it turns out is that if you sit down with a computer and run the numbers, you'll see patterns of similar situations that pop up over and over and over again. So, for example, in poker, if you've got a hand that gives you an open-ended straight draw, meaning that there's 4 cards on either end, so 8 cards total, that could make your hand and make you the winner of the hand. Well, it turns out that it doesn't matter where your open-ended straight draw is, whether you need an 8 or a queen or something like that, or whether you need a 2 or a 6 or whatever, right, to make your cards. It doesn't matter. The percentages are the same. So if you just memorize, oh, well, my percentage if I have this type of hand is this, and you do that for all of the scenarios that you see commonly, all of a sudden you look like a genius because you're sitting at the table and people are going, how did you run these numbers? And you're like, I just memorized the scenarios. Now, the hard part about Magic is that it's really too complicated for many situations to be useful in this way. But there are 2 that I wanted to hit on today that are very reasonable and come up all the time and that we can get good numbers on. So the first one is deciding to take a mulligan based on how many lands are in your hand, okay? Because how many times have you found yourself in a situation where you're looking at a 2-lander, right? And if you hit your 3rd land drop by turn 3, the hand works. You can make it work. You had a 2-drop, you could play your 3-drop or have more options or whatever. And you would say, I would keep it if I knew I was going to get that 3rd land by turn 3. But if you didn't, it would have to be mulliganed back. So what I've done is run the numbers here for if you've got 17 lands in your deck total, and you have 2 lands in your opening hands, and you want to or need to hit your 3rd land drop by the 3rd turn, if you are on the draw, which is really significant here because it means you get to see a whole nother card before that turn 3 land drop timer goes off, you are 85% to do so. So if your hand really does work, if you hit the 3rd land, then it's a keep. I mean, you are 85%. That is very, very high percentage to hit your 3rd land drop by turn 3. Now, if you're on the play, it changes a lot. It's 71%. And is a huge difference. We're talking 14% swing here in the wrong direction if you happen to be on the play. So you need to really be sure that your hand is going to function on that 3rd land, and then you can consider keeping it. But you should also look at that hand and say, what is the disaster scenario where I don't hit it by turn 3? Because, 71% is actually still pretty high, but, 85 I would feel quite comfortable with.
I mean, to even simplify this further, you can basically always keep a 2-lander on the draw. Your hand doesn't have to be spectacular to do that. It's you're 85% to hit your 3rd land. And then a 2-lander on the play bears a little more scrutiny where you do need to make sure you have 2 good 3-drops in order to make this hand playable, or some of your better cards. But for the most part, you can keep them on the play too. It's not irresponsible to do either.
No. And this is all under the umbrella of that's the criteria. If you have 3 5-drops in your hand, well, I'm sorry, but hitting your land drop on turn 3 is not going to get you there. So you need to adjust. But if you do now, I also ran this if you've got a 16 land deck. So instead of running 17, you're running 16. So same scenario on the draw. Before we were 85%, now we're 82%. So not really enough to change our mind. And then on the play, it goes down by 4%. So instead of being 71, it's 67. So it's significant. You're losing 3 and 4% respectively, but probably not enough for you to change it meaningfully. But that does matter,
no,
right?
Yeah,
those percentages add up.
This doesn't change how I'd overall approach these, but it does also show me that like there are costs to playing 16 land. When you play 16 land, you are making it so about 1 out of every 20 times you're not going to hit compared to a 17 lander, you know?
Exactly. Yep. And then I also ran it for if you've already mulliganed, just to see if it would change it that much. So now you've got 6 cards. 2 of them are lands, and the card you put back of your opener is not going to be a land. So you're going to end up with 6 cards, 2 of which are lands. If you're on the draw, you're still almost 84% to hit, and you're 69%. 17 lands, then you're 69%. So It doesn't actually go down that much. So you'd run the same thing for that. Now, the other scenario that I thought of for one that comes up often, and one that you should just be aware of kind of what kind of risks you're taking on and when you can, assume to get these things, is splashing. So if you're splashing for a 3rd color and you have 2 sources of that color, because most of the time people are deciding between like 2 and 3 sources, right? That's kind of the most common thing. Do I want to do 2 or 3 sources here? Here are your percentages of having found them at different points in the game. In your opening 7, if you've got 2 sources of your splash color, you're 32% to have one of those in your opener. By turn 4, you're 47%. By turn 7, which is, later in the game-ish, now we're getting to the late game, 58%. And by turn 10, you're 67%. So by turn 10, which is kind of like, I think, the reasonable long game cutoff, you're 2/3 likely to have found that color. So not actually that good. And then just to sort of run it out, by turn 13, which is the point at which you're halfway through your library, you're 75% to have hit one of your 2 sources. And turn 20 is when you get to 90%. And it goes up from there, of course. So turn 20 is really deep into your deck before you get to that like almost certainty. The real key here for me is like turn 7 to turn 10, which is 58 to 67% on 2. Now, let's see how they change if you turn this from 2 sources into 3 sources. In your opening hand, it's 44% versus 32, so much better. By turn 4, you're 63% to have hit with 3 sources. And again, to reflect that back to 2 sources, it's 63 versus 47. By turn 7, you're 73% versus 58, so significantly higher. And by turn 10, again, kind of in my mind, the reasonable cutoff for like, I probably should have hit it by here because not all games go much longer than that. You're 82% to have hit. And then just to run it out again, by turn 13, you're 88. And turn 14 is when you get to over 90 versus turn 20 on 2 sources. So the difference between 2 sources and 3 is huge. It is deal breaker. To me, if you're going to run 2 sources, I think you can get away with it, but you better have a deck that is designed to go long, and you better have a card that you're splashing that doesn't need to come down early. Both of those things have to be true for you to be able to get away with the 2 sources. If either one is not true, I would consider not splashing if possible. Because the difference between 2 and 3 is huge. And then just for fun, I ran it for the crazy people out there, and I have seen this before, who try to splash off of 1 source. The percent chance in your opening hand is 17. It's pretty low. Turn 4, it's 27%. Turn 7, it's 35. By turn 10, you're still not half. It's 42%. It takes you till turn 13 of the game to get to 50% to have drawn your 1 source. And to get to that 90%, we'll call that certainty, is turn 29, where you have 4 cards left in your deck. So don't do that. Obviously, we knew that was not going to yield good results, but I do think it's interesting to see the difference between the two. but particularly between having 2 and 3. The difference is huge. Getting that third splash source is the difference between, on later part of the game being between, say, 73 and 82% in the late game versus 58 to 67. It is a huge difference.
Yeah,
so
and
that the lesson is to really try to get to 3.
Right. You ran all these numbers, which I think is good. It's due diligence, and it also gives people the tools to kind of do it themselves. Again, using a hypergeometric calculator. But the takeaway really is splash off 3 sources minimum. Like, unless you've got some particular exceptions or some, like it's a super late game card. You have a bunch of like discard to draw effects, like, thrill of possibility type effects. So you're less likely to get stuck with a dead card in your hand and all that. But for the most part, I aim for 3. That's my rule of thumb, is I like splashing off of 3 and don't splash off of 1 unless it's like a Golos activation. 1 red source is fine, because Golos can also search up that red source, and it's also just not that big of a deal if it doesn't come together. But if you want to splash a Sundering Stroke in your deck, try to do a little better than just 1 mountain or a mountain and a golden egg. Like try to get that third source in there, or 2.5 golden egg, right? Counts is kind of like a half there.
Exactly. And, the thing I like about doing it this way is that we would have told you this without these numbers, right? I've played long enough to know that 3 is where you want to be, and you can get away with 2 in some scenarios. But I like being able to see, we were right. Like, this is why 17 lands works. This is why, splashing for 3 sources rather than 2 is a little bit better, or significantly better in this case, to actually be able to flesh out the numbers. So anyway, that's it. That is your little takeaway from some numbers from the calculator. And once again, I'll put it in the show notes, and you can play around with stuff yourself on there. Although, like I said before, I tried to do some more deeper stuff with this for Magic, and it just becomes like a concept that you can't really relate. It just becomes like a unique scenario too quickly. And then it's not, you're not really getting takeaways out of it, or stuff that you can actually sit down at the draft table and use. And of course, that's what we aim for here on LR. We love talking numbers and getting into it, but at the end of the day, we want you to actually get better, not just feel like you're getting better. We want your win percentages to go up. And that means that we really try whenever we can to attach takeaways or lessons from it, so that you can actually sit down and go, oh, well, you know what I listened to, that, I can keep this hand because I'm 85% to get there, or I'm going to splash this, but I am going to stretch a little bit for the third source because it's actually worth it by the numbers. All right, let's call it a show there, Luis. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR, and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com, including every episode ever. They're all there, the whole archive. You can download them, listen to them, stream them, whatever, all on LRcast. You also should check out channelfireball.com. That's the place to go for everything you need Magic related. If you want to sell cards back to Channel Fireball, you can go to channelfireball.com/buy list. And it's really easy. You just punch in the cards you have, and it kind of adds them to like a cart, like a shopping cart. It's just they're shopping from you instead of you shopping from them. And then it's really nice. You can choose if you want to either just get cash, like they'll write you a check or PayPal or whatever, or you can trade them in for store credit. And if you do, you get a 30% bonus on that trade in. So if you're going to buy Magic cards anyway, you should absolutely do this. It's a no-brainer, to trade them in for store credit. And I highly recommend doing so. That's channelfireball.com/buy list. That's going to do it for this one.
I do want to add one quick thing, that we are launching a new product, which I think is really cool, which is the Baller Box. This is
the Baller Box.
It's a subscription crate where you sign up, and it's quarterly. We send out a box full of cool Magic swag, packs, other cool stuff. And there's either the draft box version where you get everything you need to run an 8-person draft, or the just classic Baller Box, which has just, like I said, a bunch of cool Magic, loot crate type stuff. So if you want to check that out, if you go to channelfireball.com/baller, you can do that. And we're offering $10 off if you order before the 28th, or honor before the 28th of November here. So that's a cool Black Friday offering that we're going to continue on into the future. And I think it's pretty sweet.
Oh, we should mention that too, that if you are listening, right as the show went up, that's the week of Thanksgiving for our listeners in the US. There are sales on Channel Fireball every day leading up to Black Friday this Friday. So you should check that out as well. Okay, that will do it for this one. We'll see you next week.
So I got a bunch of interesting Genius or Grifters. This actually came from Twitter. Someone at Max Torsion, he posted a bunch of interesting scenarios, and I kind of wanted to go through them because I thought they were pretty good. So for those of you who haven't heard Genius or Grifter, well, it's exactly what it sounds. We look at a scenario, and Marshall and I determine whether we think it's genius or grifter. If you don't know what a grifter is, it's basically a hustler. Someone's trying to scam someone. Or in some cases both, some cases neither. There's those 4 possibilities. So how he kicked it off is assume that these are all happening in round 8 of a GP where you and your opponent are both 6-1, because that sets the stage for it being a pretty highly competitive thing. Like this is not Friday Night Magic. All right. Mm-hmm. Number 1, the opponent has Liliana of the Last Hope in play, and you have nothing in play. And Liliana ticks up. Her tick up ability is +1 up to 1 target creature gets -2/-1 until your next turn. So you go Delver of Secrets. It's a 1/1. Say go. On their turn, they're like plus Liliana past the turn. On your upkeep, you're like, okay, Delver triggers. They're like, no, your Delver should be dead. It's like, you didn't target my Delver. What do you think? Genius or Grifter?
I would say Grifter. I would prefer that the Liliana player was a little more precise, but I think that it's fairly obvious what's happening there. So I would say it should be assumed that you knew that it was targeted, I guess.
Yeah, the where I come down on a lot of these is if you're not confused about what your opponent intended, and it's in this case, it's not like you have 2 different 1/1s and they're like plus Liliana go, because then at that point it's like, okay, I don't know what you really intended to do there. But if you end up doing it there, like what did you think was happening there? I think it's Grifter, and I think it's very similar to something we've discussed before, which is you cast Claustrophobia on your opponent's creature. This is 1 blue enchantment. Mm-hmm. When it enters the battlefield, tap the creature, and then it doesn't untap from there on out. If you don't announce the Claustrophobia tap trigger, technically they can leave it untapped, and then on their turn, you notice, and they're like, you never announced the tap trigger because you can miss a trigger.
Right.
I also think that's Grifter because you know what your opponent intends when they put Claustrophobia in your creature. You're kind of free-rolling on the fact that no one really makes you announce that. You're making the world a worse place by making it so everyone has to announce Claustrophobia triggers. When like, look, if I put a Claustrophobia in your creature, you know that I know you want it to tap it. Why do we have to do this? So,
of course, there's no reasonable scenario where that's not what you wanted.
And if it's not what you wanted, you could announce that. Well, I guess actually in the Claustrophobia case, you can't miss your own triggers. Whatever. I think Liliana is Grifter. Mm-hmm. Also, this person had a poll there. So the public said 33%, 100% clean play, and 66% or 67% Grifter. There's 3 different levels of Grifter, but I'm going to simplify it and say that, 2/3 of people thought this was scummy. All right.
Yeah, that's scummy.
Number 2, I have a Grafdigger's Cage in play and a Wrenn and 6 on 7 loyalty. This is a Planeswalker from Modern Horizons where the ultimate is -7. All spell instants and sorceries in your graveyard gain retrace, which means you can play them from the graveyard by discarding a land. The opponent's at 9 life. You say, I ultimate Wrenn and 6. Your opponent goes, okay. And you're like, I have 3 lands in hand and a bolt in my graveyard. The key here is you can't actually retrace Lightning Bolt success with the Grafdigger's Cage in play. You can't, you can pay the cost, you just can't do anything. Actually, I don't even think you can announce it. No.
So you're hoping that by you just mentioning and maybe even showing that you have these 3 lands with the bolt that your opponent will go, okay, I can see.
Yes, you're implying I cast Lightning Bolt 3. I'm going to cast Lightning Bolt 3 times through my own Grafdigger's Cage because it's your own cage especially is what makes this kind of spicy, where you're playing against Dredge or something, you set it in Grafdigger's Cage, so you don't really think about your own hate cards affecting you that much. And you're saying, I'm going to retrace this 3 times and kill you. And then your opponent concedes. Is this Genius or Grifter?
I've always thought these were pure Grifter.
Yeah.
I hate these scenarios. I
do too.
There's so many of these that you could come up with, and you do not want to live in that world. No. You just don't want to live in the world where that's what Magic is about, is trying to trick people. There's a really famous story from a PTQ here in Seattle that's similar, and it's just, I hate it. In fact, the one from here is actually even worse because the person didn't just show the cards. They actually said that they were going to do something that they couldn't do.
Hold on. Let's test my Seattle lore. Is this casting Crib Swap on a Baneslayer Angel?
No, that's a different one. I do know that one too. This is Cast Ranger of Eos. I go get 2 Mog Fanatics, kill you, and I don't have 2 Mog Fanatics in my deck to get.
Also, who doesn't make them show in that situation?
Right. But I mean, it's in a PTQ. Yeah. Like sometimes people don't know,
so, you know. I think this is also grifter. I don't like it.
Pure grifter. Yeah.
22% said it's genius. 78% said it's grifter, and with even more on the scale of quite scummy than the previous one.
Okay.
I know a extremely well-known pro cast ribbons from the graveyard, tapped out and cast ribbons, looked at the opponent counted it. It's like, okay, I go to 1, and then the person conceded, and it's like,
ooh,
yeah, that kind of stuff. I think it's pretty bad.
I think it's bad.
Number 3, my opponent is playing Food Chain, and it's a card that sits enchantment, says you can exile a creature to add mana equal to its casting cost +1. I know it's a mana ability, right? It is. It's a mana ability. It's the same as if this was a Birds of Paradise. I call for a judge. I say yes. I say, Judge, can I name Food Chain with Needle? The judge says yes, because technically you can name any card you want with Needle, and then you go Needle on Food Chain. Is that and that, to be clear, Needle doesn't stop mana ability, so this doesn't do anything. Is it genius or grifter? Because you're trying to make your opponent think, well, the judge just said I can do this. We've kind of gone over this one before, but I still think it's interesting to talk about.
Yeah, I like genius for this one actually, because you have to throw away a card to do it. Like it's like if you get punished for it, it's like, well, I just spent a mana and a card and it did literally
the only
nothing.
Borderline thing for me is calling a judge to help in your charade, but I do think that this is a legal play, and you're not telling your opponent anything illegal. And I don't know. You sided in Needle. You took that. You paid that cost. Presumably, you sided in for something else because it's kind of aggressive to do it that way. But yeah, I think it's fine. I think it's genius actually. Like it's not like the best play in the world, but I think it's okay to do. And looks like 49% of people say it's genius. 51% say grifter. Let's see. Oh, yeah, this one's good. Me, cast Tendrils of Agony. Opponent, Mindbreak Trap. So this is a card that exiles all spells or any number of your opponent's spells from the stack. And then you say, okay, Mindbreak Trap resolves. Now my Storm Trigger resolves.
Now the Storm Trigger, yeah. I would call that grifter.
This is clear grifter for me. Like, again, there's no confusion as to what is intended here. And you're like, when you're not confused and your opponent, again, didn't sequence things in like a weird way or whatever, I think this is like, there are ways sometimes your opponent does something and you know what they intend to do, but they do the wrong thing. This, I don't think falls into that category. I think this is just very clear to your opponent.
No. Also, the Storm Trigger goes on the stack when you cast the Storm card. So they would be required to, if you want to get in that level, they would have to say Storm Trigger too. It's like if that was never said, you can't say it.
Your opponent could then, your opponent could then argue you missed the Storm Trigger if that's how you want to play it. So I think that's not only just grifter, it actually doesn't even work. Only 18% of people thought this was acceptable. So that makes it 82% grifter. I have a True Name Nemesis in play. 3/1 protection from everything my opponent does. My opponent plays Toxic Deluge, which lets you pay X life to give all creatures -X/-X. You, interjecting a little bit, paying 1 puts you to 12, and the opponent says yes. And you're like, okay, you're at 12. In response, I'll cast Zealous Persecution and give all my creatures +1/+1. So here it's...
Oh, that is really bad.
So Marshall, you're putting a Toxic Deluge on the stack, but before you even announce the number, I say, okay, so paying 1 life puts you to 12. And then
that is grifter. Because the implication is that if I say yes, that would be the case, that if I said, but I'm going to do it for 3 or whatever, that you would call a judge and say that I had already said what I was doing, which is not the case. So
yeah, I think this is grifter because you're interrupting your opponent.
Right.
So
you are allowed to ask how much you're doing it for.
So here's a slightly different scenario. And again, 37% of people say it's genius, 63% grifter. If you if I have a true name in play and you cast Toxic Deluge, put it on the table and look at me, then I'm going to be like, well, first of all, what I would say is, okay, how much are you doing it for? But I think even in that scenario, if you said, okay, are you doing it for 1? And then if you say yes, then it's like, okay, I will respond by giving my creature +1/+1. That's fine. The part I have a problem with is interrupting your opponent's spell casting to try to give them a number, because I think that's kind of nonsense.
Trying to inception them some favorable number. Yeah, no, that's nonsense.
All right. So here is the last one, which is, I think, pretty interesting too. I have a Thespian Stage in play. This is the land that copies other lands, right? And the combo is Thespian Stage Dark Depths, where you copy Dark Depths, sack the original Dark Depths, and then make a 20/20. And it's currently copying a forest. So to note, it's got the Thespian Stage ability, but currently it's the card named Forest. Your opponent plays a Pithing Needle. I say, on Thespian Stage, your opponent says yes. I say, okay. I untap, play Dark Depths, then use my Forest to make a 20/20.
Oh, God. That's a good one. You know, I kind of feel like that's genius. Like you're supposed to know how that interaction works, and if you name the wrong card, I don't love the idea of suggesting it, but I'm going to say genius. Actually, I don't think that's wrong. Yeah, right. Like you can do that.
I think it's fine because again, this isn't interrupting in the resolution of a spell. It's you're asking your opponent what they're naming. You're suggesting a little bit, but this goes back to kind of what I've said about a lot of Genius or Grifters is you don't have to listen to your opponent's suggestions. And when your opponent suggests you make a play, consider that they are your opponent and you should not be listening to suggestions by someone who does not have your best interests at heart. The reason I think the Toxic Deluge one is bad is because you're interrupting their train of thought to try to get them to name something. I think that's rude and not how you should play Magic. In this particular case, I think it's genius. It's not on you to have your opponent know all the interactions, and it's also not on you to, like, it is not the most sporting, but it is not, I don't believe it's unsporting. Like, you're suggesting they do a play. It happens to be a bad play. That's kind of okay. You like, I can attack with my 3/3 and say, okay, so you're going to block with your 2/2? And you can just say, no.
Right. And it does. Yeah. And again, like, I would say I would never play that way. Like with the Pithy Needle thing, I don't think you should, but I wouldn't say that person's, doing anything against rules. So
56% of people think it's genius. So the only one that I guess that's actually literally the only one that had over 50% of people okay with the play. So these are interesting. Again, this is at Max Torsion, MAXTORTION. Very good thread. Thank you for that. I think that's very interesting. The poll results are actually really good too. So,
that was good.
Yeah, but that'll do it. And I'm actually always looking for good Genius or Grifter scenarios. If you just want to email me, just lsv@channelfireball.com. Every time I collect a bunch of these, I like to run it because Genius or Grifter, crowdsourcing Genius or Grifters.